Response video to Hythloday, I guess. I think I'm recording. Yes, I am. So we've been over this so many times, but I'll give it one more shot. And you have to do it with some sort of thought experiment or some sort of analogy to our life circumstance, because he won't accept the elements of just describing life and saying, okay, look, life has this welfare stake, and you're basically saying it can't run a profit. Profit is impossible based on this mechanism, and he's sort of not getting that. And so it's like you have to put it in another time or place, or take it to another planet, or do something with the equation, so you force him to answer the question that essentially he would recognize something as being broken, something being flawed or destructive in its very mechanism, its function, and that he would say his intelligence provides no logical impetus, no statement. It doesn't say anything to him about any obligation to fix it, although it's right in front of him. It's fixable by just raising his hand saying, stop doing that. That's the extent of the minimum effort required, is merely to say, no, that's not a good idea, stop doing that. No real investment, no putting on a uniform, going to war, any of that kind of stuff. Just a statement saying that's wrong. It would be better if that isn't done, stop doing that. Not complicated. So, I mean, you could go back to like slavery, and you could say, yeah, there was two kinds of people. People who got it, who said, ooh, this is just disgusting and ugly, and, this ruins the game. I don't want to play the game if the game is at this price where you're going to, harm people. Maybe some people saw that with the Native Americans and just saw this as a grotesque theft and said, it's not acceptable. I'm going to protest this. I'm going to take a stand. I might even fight with the Indians. Take off a uniform, so to speak. And they did it because it was a logic exposed to them, a truth that their life had no meaning in the context of if they were going to be part of a steamroller, if they were going to be part of a mechanism that was a negative machine, a negative device, that the very function of their existence was harmful in a way that wasn't acceptable, logically acceptable, where you could say the cost was worth the benefit. And so, like I said, clearly with slavery. So you're saying that if you were a enlightened type back in the slave days, and you had a perception that there was a fundamental equality in terms of welfare stake, that the black man was just as capable, black man and woman, were just as capable of being domestically happy and comfortable in life and living a cultured and sophisticated life, and there was no inability for them to not enjoy a game of backgammon or something, and to sip some tea and all of that crap. I mean, maybe culturally they wouldn't migrate into doing the same things we're doing, but they could acquire a culture and have a civilized existence with a little bit of education. And so you were able to understand that in say the slave days. So what would you would do nothing. You would see you would intellectually be aware of no reason to even vote against slavery. You would feel no compelling understanding that just for the difference of the happenstance of birth, your consciousness could exist in that circumstance. I guess that's another way of looking at this. This is one of the known facts we have here, is that if you're not an atheist, you know that it's just pure circumstance, that you have the benefit of having white skin in 1700s, or 1600s, or you have the benefit of good health, or you have, these are just things that you're circumstantially endowed with for no meritorious reason. your consciousness didn't earn it, so to speak, those good fortunes. And so you would understand that, yes, if I'm understanding how the game is played, the roll of the dice could have meant I would have been this, or I would have been that, or I could have been subject to any one of these tortures, that those things are all on the dice that were rolled. I'm the byproduct of a roll of the dice. And the simple question is it a fair cop kind of game to say, you can't see the inevitability that the dice will be rolled again, and that these are what's written on the dice, that these outcomes are written on the dice of being a slave, or being killed horribly by a disease, or even by the circumstances of life, a coal mining accident or something, that these are all things on the dice. And if they're, say, maybe you personally don't really care if you're suffocated to death slowly in a mining accident, or maybe you don't care if you get some terminal but slowly, progressively destructive disease. Maybe all this stuff is irrelevant to you, but personally I don't find it irrelevant, and from my personal standards it seems I'm quite aware of the fact that there are many fates, living fates, worse than death, worse than not playing the game, worse than not coming back to do some kind of lucky person thing, being one of the lucky ones. Yeah, being one of the lucky ones is, it's nice, but it's not good. It's not nearly good enough to compensate for being one of the unlucky ones. And I can logically see that. So, I can't, again, this isn't a philosophical argument, because there's no agreement to the premise. You're basically saying that somehow I've made a rational miscalculation to say it's a dumb game. There's more negatives, there's more skull and crossbones on the dice than there is cotton candy, and there'd be no logical reason to ever pick up those dice and roll them. There's no incentive to do it. There's no rational incentive to have the dice rolled again and create this again, consciousness. And that's what we all are. So we're all invested in being consciousnesses. Now maybe you wouldn't mind being the baby elephant that gets eaten by the lions. Your mother dies, or your mother fights a good fight, but she gets kind of scratched up, and you get eaten alive by a lion. Maybe that fate is okay with you, because you think this is all such a fun game, and the winning elephant who lives to die of some disease later in life, somehow that makes up for the baby elephant that got eaten alive by the lions. I personally don't see how it makes up for it. It's still doomed, and it may be doomed to a death that's going to be just as miserable. Parasites eating its brain, or some sort of horror like that. You're sitting in a position where you haven't even gone through the actual dying process. You've seen other people die. I'm sure some of that has scared you a little, maybe, I don't know. The prospects of that you're going to be your fate, and so I'm just saying, where have we made a logical error in not necessarily being empathetic for the victims, but just acknowledging that we could be one? I certainly think I'm a victim as it is, even though I've been incredibly lucky. I wouldn't even want to be in the winner's circle. Being a winner is still being a loser, in my opinion. You get enough scratches and bruises to actually be a winner, that it isn't worth it, even being a winner. But it certainly isn't worth it as a loser. I don't want the risk of it. I don't want to wake up as a loser on planet Earth. If I don't want that to happen, why wouldn't it be logical for me to stop it? I just think, so you're just arguing that there is something logical about the game, that there's some logical reason not to stop the game, that there's some logical value to be preserved in maintaining a dice rolling game that serves no purpose, that tortures things without consent. So, this is a subject brought up before, but you never really have dealt with it. The fact that you can't get consent doesn't change the fact that you have now a higher standard okay, to do something. If you're going to do something without consent, if I'm going to take if I know my neighbor's got, $30,000 he's saved in his house, and I decide to go take it because I'm just sure I'm going to win at Las Vegas, I have to be really, 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 really sure that I'm going to win in Las Vegas. If I have some doubt, I have no business messing with his money. I'd have to be really so incredibly confident that I have a perfect, no fail, no possibility of failure plan. Where's the no possibility of failure plan in procreation? There is absolutely no such thing. You're playing with something's welfare, you're rolling crappy dice, and then you're going to give me an argument that there's something logical in doing that. It's completely psychological, it's completely illogical. It has no merit as a logical evaluation of the circumstance. You're going to create a need that doesn't need to exist. You're going to create something that's going to need its own existence. It's going to need to exist. What's the point in that? There's no logical reason to do that. And as I pointed out, the downside risks are so offensive to reason, to sensibilities, in terms of there's no way you would do that by itself. I mean, unless there's some huge benefit, there's no way you would just torture something. There's no logic in torture, is there? You can't see again, how can I possibly say I understand consciousness if I don't say I understand the clearest, loudest part of consciousness is a recognition that I am torturable, that I'm quite vulnerable. That vulnerability is the loudest part of my existence, and it's clearly a vulnerability to a huge negative. It would be illogical, again, for me to deny that vulnerability and to say the only thing that matters is how I feel, again, is just so pathetically unrepresentative of the real circumstance. The real circumstance is that there isn't just me. Just as I arrived here in a world that was full of human beings that existed before me, there'll be a world full of human beings that exist after me, and many of them will endure experiences I have modeled in my mind already, common experiences, commonly describable categories of life experience and perception. And I'm saying the ones who are the true victims, I mean the ones victimized in the sense that they aren't duped into some perception of purpose in their pain, will suffer hard pain and do it in an atmosphere of no purpose, which is the worst way to. It's like dying in a war where you get to see your side lose. You get to see you go through the war, you fight, you watch all your friends die, and then you get to actually see the surrender flag as your last vision before you die. That's like the lowest you can go, right? I mean, that's just as low as it gets. It's just complete failure for nothing. All is lost. And it's like that with suffering. When you suffer in an atmosphere knowing that it's just a waste, that it's squandered, and the kind of putrefaction poured on the suffering when it has no purpose. So that will be relived. That torture will be re-endured over and over and over again unless you raise up your hand and say no. That's the first step. No. And if necessary, I'll take other steps if they're provided for me, as people have done in the past. When they've been found something egregious, they have had to make a calculation, a decision on whether they're going to, like I said, many, hundreds of thousands of good men died in the Civil War, in the brutalest, baddest war you want to be in, for their principles, for their ideals, for what they perceive to be a better world. And to argue that your perspective of what's in it for me, your perspective of how does it mean something to me, again, I personally just can't understand it. Like I said, I don't love any of this stuff. It's not empathy that's driving me. It's a complete sensible aversion to the realization in my mind that it's just going to keep happening. You're just going to keep making victims unless somebody stops you, you crazy bastards. It's completely logical. Again, if Frankenstein goes tumbling down the hill out the back door of the castle, and he goes tumbling down the hill, and he's in a ditch with a bunch of other Frankensteins, the rejects. What's his sensible recourse? Start knitting booties or something? Frankenstein should just say, well, it's just the way it is. Frankenstein's not smart enough to look at the castle and say, that's where I came from. That's the monster making machine. And I got to stop that. Or there's going to be more of us sitting in this sewage. Come on, it's just logical to sit there and go find the cause and do something about it. So again, I can't, if you can't see how consciousness is put at jeopardy, how torture, that consensual torture is the risk of the game, that the people who will enjoy life, the people who will say it's a good deal, will not be the people who pay the price. They won't be the soldier that dies watching the surrender flag go up. And again, it's in what context would, again, like I said, in many circumstances the majority has to be dragged, to the trench of reason. They have to be dragged to the table of reason, let's say, by some minority that makes it unsustainable for the majority to maintain its treason or its treachery or its abuse or the rest of it. Yeah, and that takes bold people, that James Browns of the world, people who stand up and say, no, you're not doing this anymore. And they're right. And they're necessary to the cause. So it'd be fine for you to say, well, the majority has spoken, and I'm just a majority kind of democracy kind of guy, and that's as far as I can see. Well, I mean, history demonstrates that those kind of people don't make the world any better. That people do have to fight the king. They do have to have revolutions, and it's the right thing to do. So that doesn't go anywhere. The argument from the authority of the majority doesn't mean anything. And it certainly doesn't mean anything in this context where we know the mindset of the majority is controlled by silly traditional fables of purpose and function, most of them wrapped in a deity and some other bibbly-babbly-boo of bullshit. So their incompetence is glaring and easily seen. I have a fair right to declare them basically insipid. So again, why should I allow the insipid to drive the bus of the human race? The bus of the human race is going to go somewhere, and I should put the insipid in the driving seat and say that's okay, let the insipid drive? No, of course not. So anyway, but to argue that there's no such thing as a logical imperative, I just think is nonsense. I mean, if you're going to sit there and say that feelings are real, again, if you want to pretend that your feelings are the only feelings that are real, well, that's insipid as the religious crap. So I can't make any sense out of that. If you want to say that the happy people, in your estimation, are doing something so clearly meritorious in terms of feeling happy with their silly life, that it makes up for all the misery, all the suffering endured, I'll just say that's preposterous. It's nonsensical. But you have to. These are the kind of fences you have to sit on one side of the fence or the other. You can't sit there and just play some game like I have no opinion, on the functionality or the efficiency, of the conscious creation engine. No, you're either going to have to say it's making it or it's not making it. And if you want to say, yeah, it's making it, by your perspective, it's making it enough for you to have no sense of urgency about fixing anything. Well, from my perspective, obviously, it's not making it anywhere close to good enough. It's not producing anything of enough value to compensate for a tiny percentage of the torture imposed. Just even a tiny percentage of it. You could take the 100 worst circumstantial sufferings that'll take place today, this one day, find the 100 humans and animals who will do the most suffering today, and put them in a pile, just those 100 people, for a 24-hour period. And I would argue that there's nothing ever been accomplished by anything human or anything alive on this planet that's ever done anything so splendid that it would justify that suffering. And you're going to give me a say it's logical for somebody to say otherwise. Well, let me see you say otherwise logically, because I don't think you can do it. I think that is all. And such. Until next time. Really not having it. It's kind of having I don't like being here today. Kind of Flyora made a video. She's kind of not in a good place either. So we are sharing the not a good place day. Yeah. Not good. So, until next time. So forth and whatnot. Yeah. Mind over matter. Okay. Anyway, till next time.